The moment that changed everything happened on a Thursday evening in November, right between the sweet potato casserole and the pumpkin pie. My great-aunt Ruth was passing the bread basket down the table when she paused, looked at me over her reading glasses, and said in that perfectly innocent voice of hers, "Nora, sweetheart, whatever happened to the bakery? I've been waiting for an invitation to the grand opening for almost 2 years now." The table went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people chewing. The wrong kind of quiet. The kind that falls when someone has just said something that no one was supposed to say out loud. I laughed, assuming she was confused. "What bakery, Aunt Ruth?" She blinked. "The one your grandmother set aside money for." Before she passed, she set the bread basket down. She told me herself. Said she wanted you to have something that was truly yours. I looked at my mother. She was staring at her plate with sudden, intense focus, as though the cranberry sauce had become the most fascinating thing she had ever seen. I looked at my father. His jaw was tight. And then I looked at my brother Daniel, sitting across from me with his wife, Kara, beside him. And I watched the color drain from his face like water from a bathtub. He knew exactly what Aunt Ruth was talking about. Whatever it was, he knew. I drove home that night on autopilot, my hand steady on the wheel while my mind ran in circles. Grandmother had passed almost 2 years ago. I had flown back to Texas for the funeral, cried at her graveside, spent a week helping my mother sort through her things, and then returned to my apartment in Nashville where I was finishing my 2nd year teaching elementary school. No one had ever mentioned money, not once. Not a word about a bakery or a fund or anything set aside in my name. But Aunt Ruth had no reason to lie. She was 73 years old and had nothing to gain from making up stories at Thanksgiving dinner. She had loved my grandmother, loved our family, and she had said what she said, the way people say things when they believe everyone already knows. I sat in my parking lot for 20 minutes before going inside. I made tea I didn't drink. I sat on my couch and stared at the wall and tried to make sense of a world where my grandmother had left me something, and I had never found out. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Call me tomorrow, honey. We can explain everything." That word stopped me cold. Explain. Not clarify. Not there's been a misunderstanding. Explain. You explain things that need justification. You explain things you did on purpose. I typed back one word. How much? She didn't answer that night. I called Aunt Ruth the next morning. She answered on the second ring, and I could tell from the heaviness in her voice that she had been expecting to hear from me. "Tell me everything you know," I said. She exhaled slowly. "Your grandmother came to me about 8 months before she died. She showed me her will and she wanted someone to know, someone outside your immediate family, so there would be a witness to her wishes." She paused. "She left $60,000 specifically designated for a small business venture for you. She said you'd always talked about opening a bakery, since you were about 7 years old making birthday cakes in her kitchen. $60,000. I sat down on my kitchen floor. "She sent the money to your parents," Aunt Ruth continued. "She trusted them to hold it until you were ready. She thought they'd tell you when the time was right." Another pause, heavier this time. I assumed they had. After I hung up, I stayed on that kitchen floor for a long time. Then I pulled up my bank records, my emails, every message my parents had ever sent me. Nothing. No mention of any money, any fund, any wish from my grandmother that I should have a business of my own. In the months after her death, my family had sent condolences, recipes, a box of her jewelry, and exactly nothing else. My phone buzzed again. Daniel this time. "Hey, can we talk? Just us? Before you talk to Mom and Dad." There it was. His guilt had beaten his strategy. He wanted to get to me first, shape the narrative, soften whatever was coming. I had known my brother for 31 years and I recognized that move. "No," I typed back. "I'll talk to everyone together." I drove to my parents' house that Sunday. The drive from Nashville to their place outside Memphis takes about 3 hours, and I spent most of it talking to myself, rehearsing what I would say, reminding myself to stay calm. I had stopped by a gas station and bought a small notebook. I was going to write down everything they said. I was done being the person who walked away from a hard conversation with only her feelings and no facts. My mother opened the door before I reached the porch. She had been watching for my car. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she reached for me immediately, and I stepped back without meaning to. The hurt on her face was instant. "Come inside," she said softly. Daniel and Kara were already there, sitting at the kitchen table. Kara was studying her hands. Daniel looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. My father was standing by the counter holding a coffee mug he clearly wasn't drinking from. I sat down, opened my notebook, put my pen on the table. "Start talking," I said. My mother made a small wounded sound. "Nora, please don't be like this." "Like what?" "Like you've already decided we're the enemy." "I've decided I want facts," I said. "I've decided I want to understand what happened to $60,000 my grandmother set aside for me. I've decided I want to know why I'm hearing about it for the first time from Aunt Ruth at Thanksgiving 2 years after Grandma died." I looked at each of them in turn. "Someone explain." Silence stretched for a long moment. Then Daniel exhaled and said, without looking at me, "We needed it." The simplicity of those 3 words hit me like a wall. "The house," Kara said, quickly, as if speed could soften it. "We were trying to buy the house on Sycamore. We were 40,000 short and the seller wasn't going to wait, and Daniel's credit wasn't where it needed to be, and we had already applied twice, and—" "Stop," I said. She stopped. I turned to my mother. "You knew." She pressed her lips together and looked down. That was its own answer. "Dad." My father set his coffee mug down carefully. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Your grandmother sent the money to us to manage. We made a judgment call." "A judgment call," I repeated. Daniel was in a bad place. The house would have fallen through. They would have had nowhere stable to go. Kara was pregnant. "I didn't know Kara was pregnant." A new silence. "You didn't tell me that either," I said, and my voice came out quieter than I expected, almost fragile. "You didn't tell me any of it. Not that Daniel needed help. Not that he was struggling. Not that there was money in my name sitting there. You just took it. You decided on my behalf, for me, about money that was mine, and you never once asked." My mother looked up. Her eyes were shining. "You were doing so well, Nora. Your job, your apartment, your life in Nashville. You were happy. You didn't need." "You don't get to decide what I need," I said. "That wasn't your decision to make. We were going to pay it back." Daniel's voice was hoarse. "That was always the plan. We were going to refinance once we had equity and pay you back the whole amount plus interest." "Did you?" The pause before he answered told me everything. Things got complicated. "How complicated?" He rubbed his hand across the back of his neck. Kara was still staring at her hands. My mother made a small sound that might have been the beginning of a sob. "Daniel." My voice was steady and cold in a way that surprised even me. "How complicated?" He looked up. For the first time since I'd walked in, he actually met my eyes, and what I saw there wasn't defiance, it was shame. "We took a home equity line about 14 months ago, 35,000. My pen was moving before I could think about it. "And the investment we put it into didn't work out the way we planned, and now He stopped. Started again. "We're behind on payments." I put my pen down. My grandmother's $60,000 had not just been borrowed without my knowledge. It had been used as collateral for an additional loan. That loan had been lost in some failed investment, and now the foundation that was supposed to be my future was sitting underneath a financial disaster that had nothing to do with me. My father said something about how they had meant to protect everyone. My mother said something about family and difficult choices. Kara said she was sorry, and from her voice I almost believed it. Daniel said nothing else. He just sat there looking at the table, and for one brief moment I felt the pull of old sympathy, the reflex I had been running on my entire life. He was still my brother. I had grown up with him. I knew every version of him, including the scared one sitting across from me now. Then I thought about my grandmother standing in her kitchen, showing me how to measure flour by spooning it into the cup instead of scooping. I thought about her telling me, when I was 9 years old, that I was going to do something wonderful someday, and that she was already proud of me. I thought about what Aunt Ruth had told me, that she had wanted me to have something truly mine. I closed my notebook and stood up. "I'm not doing this today," I said. "I'm not sitting here while you explain to me why it made sense to take what belonged to me. I'm going home. I'm going to think." and then I'm going to figure out what comes next." My mother stood too. "Nora, please. We can fix this." "How?" I asked. She didn't have an answer. My father said, "If you take this to a lawyer, you will blow this family apart." I picked up my keys. "Dad, you already did that. I'm just the one willing to look at the pieces." I got in my car and drove 40 minutes before I had to pull off the highway because I was crying too hard to see the road. I sat on the shoulder with my hazards on and cried the ugly, ugly kind, the kind that had been building for 2 years without me knowing it. Grief for my grandmother that had never fully landed, grief for the version of my family I had believed in my whole life, grief for the bakery I had dreamed about since I was a little girl watching my grandmother cream butter and sugar together in her yellow kitchen. When the crying was done, I felt scraped out and clear. I pulled back onto the highway. That week I found an attorney in Nashville named Marcus Webb, a soft-spoken man in his early 50s, who wore sweater vests and spoke with the careful precision of someone who had been delivering hard truths to upset people for a very long time. I brought what I had: Aunt Ruth's account, my grandmother's will, which I had requested a copy of from the county courthouse, and the screenshots of the few texts my mother had sent me in the days after the Thanksgiving dinner. He read through everything without expression. Then he took off his glasses and said, "The will is very specific. The $60,000 was designated to you by name for business purposes. Your parents received it as trustees with explicit written instructions, and they used it for my brother's down payment." "Yes," he paused. "That's a breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of designated funds. And if they used assets derived from that money as collateral for a secondary loan, it compounds the issue significantly." I looked at my hands. "What can I do?" "You can pursue civil action to recover the funds. Given the documentation in the will, your case is strong." He leaned back slightly. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Larson. These cases are painful when family is involved. You should expect resistance. You should expect them to frame you as greedy or dramatic or ungrateful. That's very common." I almost laughed. I had already been called all 3 of those things, in so many words, in the 24 hours after Thanksgiving. "Get me a copy of the deed on the Sycamore property," he said, "and any documentation you can find about the home equity loan. We'll go from there." I pulled the property records myself. The deed listed Daniel and Kara as joint owners. The purchase date matched almost exactly with the period after my grandmother's money had been transferred. The home equity line of credit came up in the county records too, taken out 14 months ago, secured against the property. The money trail was clear. My grandmother's $60,000 had become Daniel's house. Daniel's house had become collateral for $35,000 more. That $35,000 had disappeared into something I still didn't fully understand. I sent the records to Marcus Webb and went back to teaching second graders how to read. For 2 weeks I heard nothing from my family except a few texts from my mother that I read but didn't answer. Each one a variation of the same theme: "We need to talk. We can work this out. Please don't do something we can't undo." Then, late on a Tuesday night, my phone rang. It wasn't my parents or Daniel, it was Kara. "I know you don't want to hear from me," she said. Her voice was flat and tired, all the careful composure gone. "But there are things you don't know, and I can't let you walk into this without knowing them." I sat up in bed. "Go ahead." She took a breath. "The investment, the one Daniel said failed." She stopped. "He never told your parents the full story. He told them it was a business opportunity. It wasn't." Another pause. Longer. "He was trying to pay back a private loan he had taken out 3 years ago. Before the house? Before your grandmother's money. He has been hiding a significant amount of debt from everyone, including me, and when the home equity line didn't cover it, I found out everything." My mouth was dry. "How much are we talking about? Between the outstanding private loan and the missed home equity payments and the penalties," she said, "we are looking at around $90,000. I leaned back against my headboard and stared at the ceiling. "I'm telling you this," Kara continued, "because Daniel is my husband and I love him, but what was done to you was wrong, and it has been wrong from the beginning, and you deserve to know the full scope of what you're walking into." Her voice cracked slightly. "Your grandmother loved you. She wanted you to have something, and we destroyed it before you ever knew it existed. I am so sorry for my part in that." After she hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I called Marcus Webb's office and left a message asking him to call me as soon as possible. The next week was a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Marcus filed a civil claim for recovery of the $60,000, citing the clear, written intent in my grandmother's will, the documented transfer to my parents as trustees, and the misappropriation of funds to an unintended beneficiary. He also noted the secondary home equity loan taken against an asset derived from those funds. The day the certified letter arrived at my parents' house, my mother called me 14 times in 3 hours. I let all of them go to voicemail. When I finally listened, her voice moved through every register: shock, anger, pleading, grief. The last message was just her crying. I sat on my couch and listened to it and let myself feel how much that hurt before I set the phone down. My father came to Nashville. He knocked on my door on a Wednesday morning, and when I opened it, he looked smaller than I had ever seen him, his shoulders rounded, his eyes carrying something he didn't know how to put down. "I'm not here to fight," he said. I stepped back and let him in. He sat on my couch and looked around my apartment the way parents look at the evidence of a life they weren't entirely present for. The bookshelf of children's literature, the framed photograph of my grandmother and me at her kitchen counter, the small collection of cookbooks stacked by the window. "Your mother and I talked all week," he said, "about why we did what we did, about whether we can justify it." He shook his head. "We can't. There's no version of this where what we did was right." I sat across from him and waited. When your grandmother sent the money, Daniel had just told us about the debt, the private loan. We didn't know about all of it, not then, but we knew he was in trouble. He stared at his hands. "And your mother said what she always says, that you would be fine, that you were resilient, that Daniel needed the safety net more than you did because you had always landed on your feet." "I land on my feet," I said carefully, "because no one ever catches me when I fall." He looked up. His eyes were bright. "I never asked you to watch me struggle," I said, "because every time something hard happened, you were already focused on Daniel. So I stopped mentioning the hard things. I stopped telling you when rent was tight, or when I was scared, or when I sat in my car and cried before going into school because I didn't know how I was going to get through the day. I heard my own voice waver and steadied it. You looked at my life from the outside and decided I was fine. You never asked if I was fine. There's a difference." My father put his face in his hands. We sat in silence for a long time. Before he left, he said, "Tell me what you need from us to make this right." "I need the $60,000 my grandmother intended for me," I said. "That's what I need. What comes after that, what our relationship looks like, that's going to take time." He nodded. He didn't argue. He walked to his car and I watched him go from my window and felt the particular loneliness of being right when you wished you weren't. The mediation was held on a gray Thursday morning in a small conference room downtown. The mediator was a calm woman named Dr. Patricia Osei, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had the steady, unhurried manner of someone who had sat at the center of many broken families. My parents sat on one side of the table, Daniel and Kara on the other. I sat beside Marcus Webb, and across from me, my family looked exhausted and sorry in the way that people look when consequences have finally arrived at their door. Dr. Osei began by summarizing the situation in the measured language of someone who dealt in facts. $60,000, a grandmother's will, a designated purpose, a diversion of funds, a secondary loan, missed payments, a civil claim for recovery. She asked me what outcome I was seeking. I had thought about this for weeks. "I want the $60,000 returned to me," I said, "in full, whether through the sale of the property, a payment plan, or another arrangement. I want what my grandmother intended me to have." Daniel's lawyer, he had brought one, which I had expected, said his client was willing to negotiate a structured repayment over 3 years, given the current financial strain on the household. Marcus said 3 years was unreasonable given that the original misappropriation had already spanned 2 years without any attempt at repayment or disclosure. My mother said, in a small voice, that they were willing to contribute from their retirement savings to accelerate the timeline. I looked at my mother when she said that. She was looking at the table, her hands folded, the lines around her mouth deeper than I remembered them being at Thanksgiving, as if the past few weeks had aged her. Dr. Osei asked Daniel directly whether he was prepared to acknowledge that the funds had been misappropriated. There was a long pause. Kara touched his arm. And then Daniel, my brother, who I had known since before I could form a full sentence, looked across the table at me and said, "Yes, I am. What was done with that money was wrong. It should have been yours from the beginning." Nothing about those words was easy for him. I could see that. I could see the cost of them in the way he looked afterward, like a man who had just set down something very heavy and didn't yet know how to stand without the weight. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. The agreement we reached was this. Daniel and Kara would refinance the Sycamore property, paying off the home equity line, and from those proceeds a lump sum of $30,000 would go to me within 90 days. My parents would contribute the remaining $30,000 from their savings. Within 6 months I would have the full $60,000 my grandmother had set aside. It wasn't instant, it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was documented, and it was mine. When we walked out of the conference room, my mother fell into step beside me in the hallway. She didn't touch me or try to hug me. She just walked next to me until we reached the elevator. "I know you can't forgive this right now," she said. "I'm not asking you to." "Good," I said. "I just want you to know that I hear you. What you said, about landing on your feet because no one catches you." She stopped. I didn't see it. "And that's on me. That will be on me for a long time." The elevator doors opened. I stepped in. She stayed in the hallway. "I love you," she said. "I am genuinely sorry. I know that's not enough." The doors closed. I let the full weight of it settle on the drive home. The grief, the anger, the strange exhaustion of being right. A part of me had wanted a clean ending, a clear villain, a story I could tell without any complicated edges. But my family was not a clean story. My brother was not pure villain. My parents were not monsters. They were people who had made a series of deliberate choices, each one easier than the last because I had always absorbed the cost in silence. That was the part I needed to sit with. Not just what they had done to me, but what I had allowed, for years, in the name of keeping peace and being the easy one. I thought about my grandmother, about her kitchen, about the smell of brown butter and cinnamon, about the way she would press her hand over mine when I was shaping dough and tell me I had a gift. She had known something about me that I had been slowly burying under years of being manageable and low maintenance and fine. She had wanted to hand me back to myself. That night I pulled out my notebook, not the one I had brought to my parents' house, but a different one, older, with a green cover, where I had been writing down bakery ideas since I was about 22 years old. Recipes, names, the kind of neighborhood I imagined, the kind of light in the windows, the sound I wanted people to feel when they walked through the door. I read through it for the first time in months. It was still good. It was still mine. 3 months later, the first check arrived. I deposited it and sat in my car in the bank parking lot for a while, feeling the strange lightness of something returned. 2 months after that, the second one came, and the account where I was building the bakery fund passed $60,000 and kept going, because I had been saving on my own too. Slowly and quietly, the way I did most things. I found a small commercial space in East Nashville. A former flower shop with big windows and original tile floors, and a kitchen that needed work but had good bones. My realtor said it had been sitting empty for 7 months. I stood in the middle of it on a Tuesday afternoon with light coming through the windows at a low winter angle, and thought about my grandmother standing in her kitchen in the early morning, flour on her apron, humming something I never quite caught. I signed the lease on a Friday. I called my mother that evening. Not to share the news exactly, but because I found that I wanted to hear her voice, which surprised me more than I let on. We talked for almost an hour, carefully at first, and then a little less carefully. She asked questions about the space. I answered them. Before we hung up, she said she would love to come see it sometime, if I was open to that. "Not yet," I said. "But eventually, that's more than I hoped for," she said. Daniel texted a few days later. Short, careful, the kind of message written and rewritten several times before being sent. "I heard about the space. I hope it's everything you planned. I owe you more than money and I know that. I'm trying to figure out how to be someone who deserves to know you." I read it twice, saved it, didn't answer that day, but I didn't delete it. The morning of the soft opening, I woke before my alarm. The sun was barely up over East Nashville, the light thin and new, and I lay in bed for a moment, just breathing before I was ready to move. I thought about all the versions of this morning I had imagined over the years. All the times I had almost believed it would never happen. All the ways I had been quietly talked out of my own dream by a family that loved me and still managed to leave me behind. I got up, made coffee, drove to the bakery, unlocked the door with my own key. The smell of the place had already changed since I'd taken it over. Less dust and empty air and more flour and vanilla and the faint sweetness that gets into walls when you bake in a space long enough. I stood at the counter for a moment, running my hands along the edge of it, and felt something I had been waiting a long time to feel. Not victory, not revenge, just arrival. The first customers came at 8. A few neighbors, a couple of regulars from the coffee shop 2 doors down who had been watching me through the window all week during setup. Aunt Ruth drove down from Memphis with 2 of her friends and cried openly at the display case, which made me cry too, which made the neighbors think we were both disasters, but that was fine. My grandmother's recipe for brown butter snickerdoodles was on the menu. So was the birthday cake she used to make, the one that had started all of this, dense and golden with lemon curd between the layers. I had written both recipes by hand on the card in the case. By mid-morning, the line was out the door. I stood at the counter and helped every single person, because I needed to be present for every moment of this, needed to feel the full weight of what it meant. At one point, I looked up and saw Aunt Ruth watching me from the corner table with that look she had, the one that said she was seeing something she had been waiting for. I smiled at her across the room. She pressed her hand to her heart. That evening, after the last customer left, and I was wiping down the counter in the quiet, I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Daniel. Just 4 words. Come see it sometime. It was not forgiveness. It was not pretending that nothing had happened. It was something smaller than that and maybe more honest. A door left slightly open. The possibility of something better held very lightly. The way you hold something you're not sure about yet, he wrote back within a minute. I will. Thank you. I locked up the bakery, turned out the lights, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the sign I had designed myself, the one with my name on it, Nora's, in simple letters with a small illustration of a rolling pin underneath. My grandmother had wanted me to have something truly mine. I finally did.